Hello, and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.15 jungle tier list. So if you enjoy the content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of jungle changes this patch. We saw a nerf towards Shyvana, who obviously came out as a big winner over the last couple of patches. The Shojin Liandry Riftmaker variation has been doing really well. They wanted to tap it slightly, but not too much. In the end, not really enough. She still reigns pretty supreme within low elo. Obviously, the higher elo you go, the more she falls off. People are more likely to punish you for playing this pick, but really still a very good low elo option. Other champions kind of indirectly got hit. We saw obviously changes towards Silas and Zed, primarily for mid lane. Silas already was a pretty weak jungler, even weaker now. The changes did hit him pretty heavily. In Zed's case, stays relatively neutral. And alongside this, we did have another loser this patch, which was Kindred. Her itemization got pretty heavily nerfed. Kraken was her core first item option, and the range modifier going down on that, combined with losing some movement speed, really does hurt her quite a bit within the jungle. But let's get into the tier list. So to begin with, the D tier is going to consist of relatively similar champions. Obviously, you have your Malphites and your Garens. Both these champions don't tend to do particularly well in the jungle, kind of gimmicky in the way they play. Garen does outperform Malphite substantially more. Obviously, in Malphite's case, he's kind of just built around his ultimate. He doesn't clear particularly well. His gank setup's pretty poor, pre-6. In Garen's case, he does have the movement speed, but the loss of Predator definitely does hurt this quite a bit. Until you have Stride Breaker, you don't really have the tools necessary for gap closing onto lanes, unless you have some level of hard CC. For average play, though, he can work. Obviously, not to the same degree as a lot of the other picks, but there is some level of power there. In Silas's case, he stays within my D tier. The pick, once again, has gone back to being pretty poor within the jungle, even after they took away the modifier, which hurt him quite heavily here. The power loss on like his AP ratios has definitely meant his clears a bit slower. He no longer has that same level of burst potential, which he really relies on within the jungle to be able to snowball and stay ahead of the curve and maintain a level of advantage. Rengar also here. Rengar, no secret, is obviously an incredibly elite skewed pick, one of, if not the most OTP elite skewed pick within the game. Something I'd never recommend towards a mid elo average player. Obviously, if you put the games in, you would definitely get rewarded. He has a very, very steep mastery curve. But for this kind of a tier list, just not something I would really recommend. In Skarner's case, he got buffed this patch, nowhere near enough. The champion still kind of sucks. He's incredibly unpopular and can really do with a bit more. Hopefully in 14.16 we see a bit more of a buff come his way. Maybe some level of jungle clear speed, as he still clears relatively slowly after they took away 5% maximum health of the Q damage, which definitely did hurt him quite a bit. I'm going to alternate two champions here. So, well, actually, I'm going to bring one down first, which is Neferi. I had Neferi in the C tier for a while, purely because she's relatively easy to play, fairly stat-sticky assassin. But she just doesn't really clear at the same rate as a lot of the other picks. If you're not able to really snowball, you struggle to find an advantage. I'd still recommend her over the other 5 champions in this tier, just for her ease of play. And if you get ahead of the curve, you can definitely snowball and take over games. But for the most part, I'm going to leave her with the D tier. And then Kindred is going to be swapped out with Nidalee. I have Nidalee low as well because she's also an incredibly elite skewed jungler, but she's a bit more performant than some of the other picks here. So I'm bringing Kindred down, as she did take a big hit after her nerfs and then her core item being nerfed. She now sits at the top of the D tier, something I'd really recommend avoiding for this patch until they probably buff her in 14.16. Once again, tends to be pretty elite skewed, very reliant on invading, mark stacking, playing your range correctly, depending on what kind of matchup you're into. Just something I wouldn't really recommend in its current state. Moving on to the C tier, we have Maokai. Incredibly unpopular, doesn't really have, I mean, he has good tools, and obviously he does see a level of competitive play because he acts as like a similar champion to Sejuani. Sejuani has probably, arguably better tools for solo queue, and you see that in both win rate and her consistency. In Maokai's case, he clears a bit too slowly. He's very team reliant. He doesn't really have any individual carry agency within the game, and just something I'd kind of recommend avoiding. Tank junglers in general, unless they do a large amount of damage, just something which I wouldn't really recommend for climbing, as you do end up building a reliance on your team, unless that is something you feel comfortable with, in which case you can go ahead and play something like the Maokai or the Sejuani. But Amumu is definitely still going to be my most recommended champion for low and mid elo. This pick is incredibly strong, and I believe it's even seen a level of competitive recently, so that is what I'd kind of suggest. But Maokai gonna sit at the back of my C tier. Trundle, for how easy he is to play, should definitely be higher. The pick's obviously pretty good into like AD matchups and tank matchups where you can utilize either your Q or your ultimate. But he's just not got the damage numbers really necessary to be as stat checky as he wants to be. Oftentimes he'll end up just losing, and if you ever fall behind on Trundle, you just end up being an R bot where you're just reliant on pressing R on someone and like utilizing your pyro effectively. Just something I wouldn't really recommend in its current state. Eve was a winner this patch of some of the itemization. Void Staff being buff is quite nice for her. She can opt into Protobelt, but also did get buffed, but she really just still isn't finding the same success. They over nerfed her back when they were like doing the Eve nerfs. For an AP jungle meta at the moment, like a lot of AD champions being played in the mid lane, she should really be thriving, but she just isn't there yet, and it would be nice to see some level of buffs in 14.16 as the itemization changes just haven't really done enough for her. Nidalee is going to be within my C tier, still an incredibly high elo elite skewed pick. If you can pilot the champion well, she can really easily take over games. She does a really large amount of damage. Her itemization has obviously gone towards this Lichbane, like Lichbane core, but you could go Liandry. I have seen like some iterations for Liandry, Horizon Focus, Crypt Bloom, options where you're playing more around your harass and the consistent damage with like Conqueror, stuff like that, playing more like an AP bruiser in a way. But she kind of sits in the middle of the C tier at the moment. Definitely scales quite highly with rank. In like a high elo tier list, I'd definitely rate her as like an S tier. Probably not S plus. I don't think she's like the meta at the moment, but she's definitely like fringe, really good high elo pick. Other picks here, we have Gragas, who also falls into the trap of being pretty elite skewed, but he tends to clear a bit too slowly. He's reliant on being able to get these large one-shot combos down. If people play around it correctly, it can definitely be a bit punishing, and obviously if you're not able to snowball, stay ahead of the curve, you can also really struggle on a pick like this. Doesn't have the same tools as the Nidalee in terms of like raw gap closing damage potential and harass, but definitely has more knockbacks and like tools to move people around. I'm trying to find the word, which I can never find in all of these videos. Yeah, he's really strong when it comes to like being able to move people around. I still can't find that word. Anyway, Tilia and Zyra, both of these obviously were really strong in Elite for a while. And Zyra, Tilia was generalistically just pretty strong all around. But they hit her with two pretty heavy nerfs and has definitely fallen down quite a bit because of that. Zyra obviously was flavor of the month for a while. She was really benefiting in competitive, like the brand Zyra jungle meta. She never really found that success in solo queue though. She was definitely struggling a lot more here, unlike Brand, who is still a very good pick at the moment. I would recommend avoiding Zyra, but if you can nail the clear down, focus on objective taking, she can be really oppressive within that nature, if not just outright one of the best in the game. Other champions here, actually that's all the champions which I have here. Moving on to the B tier then, so we are going to lead with Yorick. He's gaining a level of popularity within the jungle, and Yorick's one of those weird ones where he's been strong for a while in like low and mid elo. Like he does begin to fall off as you go into mid and then really struggles quite a bit in high, but like when you're not punished, you're able to clear with Maiden up, get objectives. Like his objective taking is incredibly aggressive. It's really hard to match Yorick with Maiden. Oftentimes it can create really weird fight dynamics where he has a lot more damage than just an individual champion, obviously. And yeah, this pick's kind of slept on. Obviously, it doesn't really translate into high elo, which is why you're never really going to see it really spike in like in a high amount of play. But definitely kind of something you can function in like gold to emerald direction where, yeah, it's pretty good at the moment. It's going to be on my B tier though for the moment, as it doesn't quite eclipse like into the A and S tiers in its current state. Mundo went from being underrated to overrated. The pick's still decent. Obviously, the jungle, you're not going to get punished for having as weak of an early game, especially in low and mid elo. The higher up you go, people will invade you and make sure your tempo is really bad. In the top lane, you can get punished more consistently. Obviously, there are a lot of heavily aggressive laners, and you're not playing farming simulator as you would within the jungle. But once you get your itemization down, this pick's really strong. It has really good damage and frontlining capabilities. It can make it very hard for a lot of champions to play into. And yeah, has good tools if you're running like your fleet. Has solid sustain within the jungle. Yeah, he's a good B tier pick. Pantheon, I do like Pantheon jungle. I think this pick definitely has a lot of potential. It's relatively unpopular. There was a high elo Korean Pantheon jungle player going your Q into W max, gives him a lot of CC and really solid gank potential. Obviously, he tends to be pretty early game skewed. He does have some tools mid game, which can definitely enable him to be pretty strong there. If you're going like your Eclipse, your Cleaver, your Shojins, your Sterix, his build pretty strong, and it's just general current state. The itemization is quite nice for him. He's a very solid B tier option. Definitely something I would recommend if you enjoy playing a pick like Pantheon. Zed, doing a bit better. Well, I mean, ever since his buffs in 14.14, he has been doing a bit better within the jungle. Obviously, for the most part, Zed jungle comes from like people who are auto-filled from mid into jungle playing their primary champion. I wouldn't really recommend playing Zed as like a an off meta pick. Like, if you want to add Zed to your pool, that's fine. You can definitely do something like that, but you want to put a lot of games into this champion. And if you haven't already got the playstyle down of the Zed, it can be quite hard to translate it just raw from the jungle rather than from like a mid to jungle playstyle where you're maybe not as consistently like overlanding combos or executing like team fights correctly, stuff like that. But he's in a pretty solid spot at the moment. If you do want to learn Zed jungle, he is probably the best spot he's been in since like Zed jungle has kind of come to be. Karthus, still a very solid heavy AP jungler. Obviously he got nerfed pretty heavily because he was just like massively overperforming, clearing way too fast. They tagged his Q damage down pretty heavily. In turn, he's pretty balanced at this point. If you're looking for someone to still output like insane amounts of AP damage, like with a global ultimate, he's definitely one of the go-tos in that aspect. I mean, he is the go-to in that aspect. His clear is still very fast. His objective taking is pretty good. But if you ever really fall behind tempo, it can be quite hard to really find those lethal thresholds. Making sure you're taking like your right runes in correct situations. Obviously, like Dark Harvest and First Strike tends to be a pretty heavy argument on this pick. First Strike, where you can like activate it consistently, is solid. Dark Harvest, obviously got buffed in 14.15, definitely enables it in certain situations. Yeah, he's a solid B tier pick. Hecarim got buffed in 14.14. It's fine. If you can snowball on this champion, he can be really oppressive to play against. Obviously, his movement speed and damage is very high when he is ahead of the curve. If you ever fall behind, it's really hard to play this champion out. He oftentimes just goes in, acts as like a flea, and maybe like you can dive onto a carry, but then you'll oftentimes just get one shot, as you don't really have solid durability as a frontline option. It makes it like quite hard to pilot fights. If like even if you're like even in situations, Eclipse Shojin tends to be your too fast item core build. Opportunity, quite a nice item on this pick. Obviously it really synergizes with his kit. The movement speed combined with the engage burst damage you get with like the bonus lethality can be quite a nice item on him, and you can usually just go into standard bruiser or some like hybrid lethality variations, and he's in a solid spot now. Like, he's better than he was. He definitely went from like a C tier to a B tier option, but not quite an A tier pick. You do still struggle if you fall behind, unlike some of the options which like move up, like gain the bonus of being in the A tier. Vi has definitely fallen from grace. Vi was definitely was quite high performant when like pre-bruiser itemization being nerfed. Obviously with Eclipse and Sky and Sterix all taking a bit of a hit, she did definitely lose quite a bit from that. Obviously, people are still going like E second when W second has been outperforming that for a while now. It can definitely like enable for some like win rate gain there, but just generalistically, she hasn't been as performant since Ari has kind of fallen out of meta. This pick really did synergize quite well with a lot of the AP options, and like AD mid laners just don't really function quite as well with her. Either they don't have like the hard CC she really needs to follow up on, and oftentimes you can itemize a bit easier against running like AD mid, AD top, and AD jungle, which is more common when you are running those kind of dynamics. For the moment, Vi will just sit within my B tier. Lee Sin is a very hard to execute champion, but he's in a pretty solid spot at the moment. Obviously, he can't really get much higher without being considered broken or just overpowered in high elo. This will kind of be one of the better spots he lies in for just the average player. Obviously, the build tends to just primarily be like your Eclipse into like heavy bruiser itemization. You can, of course, go like lethality, electrocute builds and like play around your heavy Q damage and like your burst potential. It tends to be a bit less consistent, but if you're very confident on this pick, then it can definitely be something you opt into and could definitely rise a couple of tiers if you are like really consistent on the pick. For high elo, probably sits like an S tier, A tier pick. For just mid low elo, I'm going to leave him in the B tier for the moment, but he's still a solid option if you put the games in. Talon received slight adjustments this patch, didn't really do anything. He still stays with my B tier. If you're once again like a mid to jungle player, then and you play Talon, then it can definitely be something which was comfortable to play. You're playing around your invade strength, being able to like poach away raptors. And yeah, that's where most of the strength of this pick kind of lies. Elise has kind of been forgotten about. In an AP jungle meta, she is like a kind of like Eve, should be like doing pretty well, really thriving of that, but just isn't finding that level of success. She's not as bad as Eve. The hard CC and the early like power of this pick can definitely enable her to be like active and do more early on into the game, whereas Eve kind of has to hit like certain thresholds to be more useful. Obviously, once again, like a lot of the AP junglers, you're already reliant on like a Dark Seal early purchase into like a Medjay's conversion to really feel quite powerful within the game and have like a level of solo carry potential. If you're not able to really get that angle, then it can definitely feel quite punishing. But obviously, Cocoon got buffed fairly recently. Well, I say fairly recently, beginning of this split, I think, where it went from like a flat 2 seconds or like 1.5 to 2 seconds to 1.5 to 2.4, something like that. She did benefit from that, makes her late game not feel as egregious, but she still struggles at the moment, definitely sits within my B tier. Graves lost a bit with Fleet being nerfed, but he does have other options. Dark Harvest is really good for snowballing. I believe they nerfed LDR this patch. I don't know if that ended up being scrapped towards the end, like as the patch went live, as I couldn't see it on the patch notes, but I have heard people talking about it still being a live thing at the moment, along with obviously Mortal Reminder losing its 5 AD. Graves going to be a bit weaker with that. He kind of sits within my B tier for the moment. Obviously tends to also just be a bit more elite skewed, kind of akin to Kindred, but Kindred's definitely struggling a lot more at the moment. Teemo is an incredibly slept on jungler in his current state. Obviously he's very low, mid-elo skewed, like that is without a doubt. The higher up you go, the more likely you are to be punished playing this kind of a pick. His control is one of the best in the game though, like which streams are really hard traps to play around oftentimes. Like certain champions just don't really have any sort of tools to deal with them. Obviously if you're playing into a lot of range, then Q becomes a lot more useful as a tool, but when your traps lose a bit of value, obviously Sweeper with range can definitely like cause some problems there. But overall, he's in a pretty good spot at the moment. Definitely something I'd recommend into like heavy auto attack based champions, where you can look for isolated 1v1 potential with maybe Ignite Smite, or if you're just running Flash Smite and you know like your limits and you can kind of play around your aggressiveness. Dark Harvest being buffed this patch definitely does help this this kind of a pick. Something I would recommend playing, honestly. Like, if you can learn Teemo jungle, you can definitely find success and possibly even climb yourself into, like, high diamond masters with this kind of a pick. Sejuani, the go-to utility tank option, doesn't do, she does damage, but not quite as much as a lot of the other picks here. Like, she's definitely, like, one of the lowest, like, 10 or, like, even 5 here. She definitely plays more into her heavy CC. Obviously, all the tools in her kit revolve around stuns, slows, being like pretty proactive on like your gank setup, making sure you're using ult on CD. And yeah, if you find these angles, you get ahead. You can definitely synergize really nicely with certain pairings. The likes of Aurelia is like my recommended go-to, where you can really easily just stack your E. Katarina is another one. Yeah, just a lot of these champions with like really good fast auto attacks or synergistic properties with your E. Really nice to play around. And yeah, she's a pretty solid B tier champion. Got buffed at the beginning of this split, I believe, when they were trying to make her more solo queue orientated rather than being a dominant pick within competitive, which I believe she currently is in her current state. But yeah, she's a solid B tier pick. Poppy, solid into dash champions. Obviously has both the tank and the bruiser variant. Bruiser tends to be a bit more popular within the jungle. This would be like your Synod Sky and possibly Halo Blades, but Aftershock and FaZe are both very viable options on this kind of a pick. And yeah, she's a really solid B tier champion, has really like deceptively high damage early onto the game, which a lot of people don't respect, and which can oftentimes enable you to snowball and like get really far ahead in tempo in the game. Kane also going to be my B tier. I've seen a lot of Kane players talking about the champion's identity is kind of in a weird spot at the moment where like AD, the lethality assassin, doesn't really feel that satisfying to play, and bruiser assassin is like a weird spot where sometimes you like want to opt into like a more assassin heavy build, but then you're incentivized to pick up bruiser items, which don't really feel that synergistic with his playstyle. I mean, obviously Red Kane tends to be the more performant of the two at the moment, and Red Kane I'd honestly recommend as like an A tier pick. Blue Kane kind of sits within a B tier, like as a B tier option at the moment, but Kane in general is a fine pick. Like if you're able to snowballs and like find an advantage, then you can definitely have really good carry potential. But if you're behind the curve and you're like struggling to get your itemization, like your 2-3 item spikes, then it can feel quite punishing to play this champion, and you tend to be a bit more reliant on being able to like find setup angles with your team and like just land a good ult onto maybe like a carry or like sustain through a tank, something like that. Yeah, he's a pretty solid B tier option at the moment. Belveth kind of sits towards the bottom of B tier. Lost a bit with Kraken Slayer being nerfed. Like the movement speed loss on that item hurts like junglers arguably more than some of the ADCs, as they're more reliant on their map movement being like able to like look for gank angles, farm quicker. Obviously, ADCs do lose quite a bit from it as well. They value being able to kite, and that is a very important tool for them. Belveth did lose a bit from Kraken Slayer being nerfed. She kind of goes from like a mid B to like a low B tier option. But yeah, if you're able to like poach away camps, as like this pick kind of relies on that, like poaching away raptors, as I will always say, and you're able to get like your advantages, your snowballing, then the pick can still be pretty successful. But she's been in a weird spot where she has been elite skewed since like her release, and like I know a lot of people in low and mid elo would really enjoy playing this pick a bit more, but it tends to be a little bit less welcoming for them, as yeah, the pick tends to be a bit more elite skewed and tends to be a bit more balanced around that kind of area, as Riot have said. Nunu gonna be over my B tier. The pick obviously has both the variations in AP and the tank build. The AP build did receive buffs this patch with Proto Belt gaining 100 HP, which is really nice for that build. Definitely does benefit him quite a bit. Arguably, like you're probably best off just going like for Leandry into Proto Belt and then playing around like a hybrid AP tank variation, or just going pure AP with like Dark Harvest. There are options there, and he's in a pretty solid high B tier spot at the moment. Tends to be a pretty unique playstyle though. Shaco is also in my B tier. He's definitely gained a bit more popularity on his AP build. It's doing alright. It's not like as strong as some of the other AP options of this, like the AP kind of English, the AP surge. I'm not going to even bother trying to use long words. I can't speak like a human being. But yeah, Shaco really has the two options in the AP kind of control, play around your boxes build, or you have the AD variation where you're playing around your early game Header Blades assassination potential. Both have good spots, and it kind of like, if you're playing them in the right spots, you can definitely push up towards the A tier. But as some people, like, I mean, as standard, most people just tend to default on AD, where oftentimes you can go AP and find decent success. And yeah, I'm going to leave him in the B tier for that. Wukong, solid B tier option. Obviously, if you get your item spikes, he's very oppressive as like a team fighting, heavy damage AD option. You are obviously reliant on those two items, like your Trinity Shojin or your Trinity Steric, or Trinity Cindered Sky. You have like build options there, but for the most important, you just got to be cognitive of, once you hit two items you really want to fight, utilize like your level 11 power spike, your team fighting, makes a really strong objective securing, and yeah, he's a really solid B tier pick. Definitely goes up if you're playing around his spikes a lot more frequently. Rek'Sai sits towards the high end of the B tier as well. Obviously pretty niche once again. Champion's gone back to relatively similar amounts of play rate, lost a bit of damage but gained a bit more durability with the changes received back along. The AoE knockup's quite a valuable tool, can definitely find really strong ways of like carrying fights with that kind of an ability. Obviously she tends to be primarily just bound to bruiser itemization, like lethality. Rek'Sai just doesn't really have the same level of success anymore. Yeah, Strybreaker, Steric, pretty nice 2-item core. You're playing around your mid game a bit more, and yeah, she's a solid B tier option. Master Yi, the high end of B tier, could arguably be an A tier pick. Like, I could swap Yi and Zac around, and honestly, I might do that. I believe Yi has a bit more agency, and I mean, Yi obviously has more agency in carrying. He is just a pure raw carry. If you're able to snowball on this kind of a pick, then he can be very strong within the game, and yeah, he can definitely have a lot of value. In Zac's case, less agency, but he can opt into things like the Leandri build, which does enable him, like, some of that back can be pretty deceptive and hard to play against if obviously he is snowballing. Like, Zac as a champion is in a pretty good spot at the moment, but like not quite. Actually, I'll leave Zac at the back of the A tier. Like, Zac is still a really solid option, because he does have more agency in carrying as a tank than some of the other picks on this tier list. But I wouldn't quite have him like as a, like, he's a low A, high B tier option. The other two picks in my B tier are going to be Jax, who lost power with his E nerf in 14.14. Actually lost a deceptively large amount of power. I mean, obviously, it is a very strong ability for him, being able to use that for like clearing raptors, utilizing it in fights, and losing like a amount of cooldown which it lost, like I believe it was 2 seconds at like level 1, has definitely in like certain occasions made it so he can't rotate 2 of this spell within a fight, which can be a pretty big power loss. Obviously, you're still W maxing on this champion for clear speed, for trading, but yeah, he lost a bit of power there. In Rumble's case, he was also nerfed in 14.14. They took some of the damage away from his Q. He went from like an A tier pick to a B tier pick. Obviously, Rumble jungle was pretty unpopular anyway. It's primarily just played by OTPs, but if you can buy another pick well, then he can be really strong. Obviously, his damage is still really high. His ult is an incredibly powerful tool. His ganks aren't bad. He has movement speed. He has slows, high damage, most of the tools which you really do want, and yeah, he's a really solid B tier AP option. Some of the A tier I'm actually going to put down towards the lower part of the A tier, because I think there's a bit of a divide in my A tier at the moment. The likes of Jarvan and Xin aren't finding the same level of consistency which I believe they should do, like bringing them down from like a high A tier to like a low A tier option. In Ivan's case, he's not really being built correctly. I believe people are defaulting too much on Redemption first and should be going Moonstone. So I can't remember off the top of my head which one's the correct variation. You should be going Redemption first, not Moonstone first in a lot of situations. I always get these two mixed around, which doesn't surprise me why just generalistically the player base seems to be getting it wrong quite a bit. Obviously, there are situations where you do want to rush Moonstone, but Redemption is suggested to have been better for a bit now. Obviously, if he makes that move over, I could definitely see him rising back up to the top end of the A tier. Other picks which I'm actually going to move down a bit are I mean, Gwen and Morgana are probably the only other two picks which are like lower A tier options. Less so for like them being a bit weaker. In Gwen's case, she doesn't really have hard CC. She's very reliant on power farming, which is just something you can't really play in every game. Sometimes you like if you have laners which can kind of play around that playstyle, then it can be really oppressive, and Gwen can be a really good jungler. But in a lot of situations, you want some level of hard CC. You want to be a bit more active on the map. And Gwen just doesn't really have those tools. But her objective taking is good. Her clearing is good. Her dueling potential is pretty good. She scales really well. Has great mid-game team fighting. Can be a bit hard as a pilot, but still a very solid A tier option. In Morgana's case, she's relying on setup. If you don't have setup, this pick can feel quite punishing to play over in the jungle. But if you get like your 3-item power spikes, then this pick is very good. I actually played this pick this morning and had a pretty solid game on it. If you're landing those Qs, getting like your W down, obviously you're maxing W for your clear speed, playing around like Leandri, Zonya, Rabbit on like a 3rd item, you can obviously go like kind of be a bit more flexible after your 2-item core. Rylai is, I know, an item which like some people really do enjoy when you don't have the same level of setup from your teammates, and you can utilize it quite nicely with your W. Her R is a better tool than it used to be. Her R used to be quite weak, but they increased the movement speed quite heavily on that ability, making it easier to use as a chase tool when you are looking to like fight, like catch out enemies. And yeah, Morgana still a really solid A tier jungle pick. And then the rest of the A tier, so we have Echo, who got benefits from Protobelt being buffed this patch. Obviously, Lichbane, Protobelt, pretty nice 2-item core on him. But you got into things like Rabadon, Zonya, Void Staff, Crypt Bloom. There are build variations there. Nash is obviously also a really good Echo item that can be something you just outright rush. On top of this, like, he is very reliant on snowballing. Medjay is also a really nice item on him. Once again, have him near Diana, as both these picks are relatively similar in their playstyle. Very reliant on snowballing, clearing really quickly once they have those AP items down as a really aggressive passive ratios for jungle monster modifiers. Diana has a bit better team fighting. Echo has obviously individual pick potential, but Diana doesn't really lack that either. Like, Diana has some level of pick potential. And also, I'd rate Diana a bit higher than Echo in her current state. The attack speed buff really did help her quite a bit here. She can also rush Nasha within the jungle and be quite successful with another item. Briar is in a really solid spot at the moment, like one of the best AD low elo junglers. Obviously, she has one of the more aggressive fall-offs into high elo. Like, this pick is really benefiting from people just not understanding how to play against her that easily. Viego probably sits towards the middle of the A tier now. Did receive a bit of a nerf with Kraken Slayer being tagged down. He does lose some power there, as he also does value the movement speed to be able to catch people and making sure he can get some damage done. If you're losing like an auto attack worth of damage because you don't have the movement speed to catch up with people, then that can be quite a big loss within a champion. So he kind of moves towards the middle of the A tier now. Mordecai is still a solid A tier pick. Has been benefiting from the itemization this season. Has had some shifts in his power. Like, they wanted to make him a bit more early game skewed, so he can be a bit more competitively and high elo viable. He's still pretty low elo bound. Like, the changes have done a bit to like readjust that, but his strength still lies in low elo, where people aren't as consistently dodging his skill shots. He has a relatively good clear. His objective taking is really strong when you can isolate people and oftentimes just take out the jungler before the fight has even begun. Yeah, he's a really solid A tier pick. Kha'Zix also going to be my A tier. He's also really doing decent. He's not doing absurdly well at the moment, but he is definitely doing like one of the best AD assassins options within the jungle at the moment. The 10 flat Q buff he received has definitely made his clear speed faster. His execute damage is a bit better. And yeah, he benefited from that quite a bit. His itemization is a pretty solid spot, and he's a very solid A tier pick. Probably like a mid, like high-end A tier option. And then we got a couple other champions here. So I'm going to bring Rammus down from the S tier to the A tier. I believe Rammus is still incredibly oppressive when you are playing him in the correct spots. Like, he does absurd amounts of AP damage. Like, people are really disrespectful to this champion within low and mid elo. Obviously, he's very reliant on being played into AD matchups primarily. Like, if you play into AP matchups, he loses almost, well, not almost all of his value, but like a lot of his value. As obviously, you can still isolate like ADCs, stuff like that. But if you're playing him in the correct spots, he is a very oppressive champion and like one of the best junglers in the game. Also very easy to play. But for the moment, I'm going to drop him down to the A tier, as he is a bit more niche and can't be played in as many spots as a lot of the other picks here. The other champion, obviously, with my A tier is Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks, played quite heavily by OTPs, can definitely find more success like when you are an OTP on this pick, and that can make it quite hard to really value this champion. For the general player though, I think he's a solid A tier pick. You can find success on this champion with his ultimate being an incredibly powerful tool. His clear is pretty fast, he has solid itemization. Yeah, really solid A tier pick. And then we're left with 8 champions. Warwick is going to remain in my A tier, still doing better with the W buffs he received like a while ago now. The itemization is pretty solid for him. Bork is a really nice item in its current state for him as well. Yeah, Warwick very deserving of an A tier spot. And my S tier. So Udyr, really strong on one item. Like, your Liandry spike, incredibly powerful. Does struggle a bit more with his itemization later on. I do find myself saying this a lot. Like, Dead Man's is a nice item on him, and like oftentimes you do want to opt into his tankier variations where you're playing like Abyssal, Force of Nature, Kaenic Rooken, Jack Show. All these can be quite nice tools on him. You can opt into like a Rift Maker if you want a bit more AP. Darkseal, Magi can be quite nice on him if you are snowballing within the game. And yeah, he's a really solid S tier option. Volibear is my recommended early game AD option. He's very easy to play. He has great gank setup. He has great dive potential. His clear is in a pretty solid spot. He's really good sustain. He's really good isolated 1v1 potential. It's just a lot of power in this pick in his current state. He's really benefiting from some of the buffs he received a while ago. And yeah, he's a really recommended S tier pick in my eyes, as he's also pretty easy to play. And he scales relatively well into like your higher elos in his current state. So Qmax, and yeah, playing around like Sundered Sky, really strong at the moment. And Volibear, very solid S tier pick. We have Brand. Brand did get nerfed in 14.14. He's still really good though at the moment. He's clear, is slow to can be a bit slower to begin with now, but definitely ramps up pretty aggressively. Obviously playing around with things like Fated Ashes and then like your Liandry power spike. Riot Eye is a really strong item on him, and his DPS output is like still enables him to have the potential just to outright carry fights. obviously, if you fall behind, it can be a bit harder to find those angles without just being blown up before the fights begin. And then you become a bit more reliant on items like Zonya's to really have those angles for like like potential damage angles, and that can be it can make it feel quite punishing to play this pick. But if you're ahead of the curve, your 1v1 potential could be really strong. I'd recommend the likes of Electrocute and Dark Harvest. Electrocute has outperformed for a while, but with Dark Harvest being buffed, it's definitely something you can opt into if you're really comfortable and know that you're going to get a lot of Dark Harvest stacks within the game, as it does obviously outscale Electrocute by like 14 stacks, I believe, something like that. And yeah, he's in a pretty solid spot at the moment. A good S tier pick. Amumu is my recommended go-to AP tank in his current state. He does absurd amounts of damage. Like, for this kind of a pick, where he's really durable, has good AoE, good CC, he does an egregious amount of damage with the likes of Conqueror, Liandry, Abyssal Mask. Obviously, Abyssal being buffed this patch, combined with some of the other nerfs to other champions, definitely benefits him. He is a very solid S tier pick. And honestly, I'd recommend him if you're just looking for something easy to play, and maybe you've been auto-filled and you just want a first time a champion within the jungle. Lilia and Nocturne are my other two picks here, so I'm actually going to put them towards the top. Lilia got nerfed in 14.13, I believe, and lost a bit of power, but she still has like different build variations she can opt into. The Liandry into Riftmaker seems to be gaining a bit more traction, doing quite well. Enables her to gain back some of that healing as she lost with the nerfs not too long ago. And then you're primarily just playing into like an AP heavy build where you're kind of akin to like brand and what itemization you want, playing around like your dot damage, going like Rylai, Zonya, stuff like that can be all quite nice on her. And yeah, she's a really solid S tier pick. And Nocturne is, Nocturne has finally been recognized as a really good champion, which I'm glad to see. Like, Nocturne has been underrated for a while. Stridebreaker should have been core first item on him for so long, but people were still going experimental Hexplate. Obviously, it works quite nicely as a second item option on him, and it can make him really oppressive to play on 2 items. He does obviously fall off quite heavily later on into the game, but if you're playing around like your level 6 to 13, where most of your power lies within the game, it can be very hard to stop this champion from being able to just take over all the lanes, securing objectives. His isolated 1v1 potential is one of the best in the jungle. And yeah, he's a great S tier pick. And then Shyvana got nerfed this patch, so she moves from the S tier to the S plus tier. I underrated Shyvana. I honestly thought with the increase in play rate, she would lose a bit of win rate, but just because this champion is so easy to play and has a very cookie cutter playstyle, and people were recognizing that, wait, we should just move from Nash's to Shojin. She actually gained so much from that. And yeah, she's a good, she is the S plus champ of this patch still. Will probably get nerfed in 14.16 again, especially for mid and low elo. She did lose a bit of power in high elo, and she did lose power in low elo, but just not quite enough compared to what she really needed to lose. Her build is still going to be your Shojin, Liandry, Riftmaker, 3 item core, and then you have options in like Rabadon, Zonya, Crypt Bloom. These can all work quite nicely on her. I'd recommend avoiding Nash's as a first item option now. It really doesn't perform anywhere near as well as her just a hybrid build, which I think is like the correct way for her to be built. It just should be a bit weaker, and yeah, when she finds that spot, she will be in a balanced state. But for the moment, she is my recommended easy go-to mid to late game AP hybrid damage option. She kind of does like a lot at the moment. Obviously punishable early on, that is where she is going to be the weakest, but some of the low elo skewed junglers tend to be in that kind of a state, which is why they tend to be a bit more low elo skewed. But overall, I'm pretty happy with the S and S plus tier at the moment. All these picks are in really strong spots. Obviously, they should probably be reeled back slightly or just nerfed for low and mid elo. Some of the A tier, B tier, obviously a lot of the A tier, B tier tend to be a bit more high elo skewed. If you put the games in, then you can definitely be rewarded. And oftentimes they can outperform the S tier options. The S tier is very clear in its current state. These champions all really do perform quite well at the moment. With the likes of Mordekaiser and Briar, there's like A tier, easy to play options, just not really as consistent as some of the S tier picks. And those are my thoughts. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.